Hello, beautifuls. Before we get into the video, I have an extremely exciting announcement, okay? 3 words, Auto World Tour. And I'm talking about the newest Auto line drop. This one just makes me so happy inside because I just love old rock music, and all of these pieces represent eras from like the 60s to the 90s, and I think they're all sick. Starting with the hoodie that I'm wearing right now, it's the With the Band hoodie. The material is so nice. I love the designs that we put on the sleeves. And then the back it's my face, which I don't know how to feel about that exactly, but honestly, I kind of think it looks pretty cool. But since these are all like band t-shirts and sweaters, I just really wanted to give it that like band look, so the only person here is me, so it had to be me. But we got tons of other items as well. So go take a look, check them out. It's limited edition. It's only gonna be out for a limited amount of time. You can get them at autobychris.com. I'll leave a link in the description for you. So grab them while you can. Thank you for the support, and let's get to the video. So let's start off when little Jerry was born. Jerome Brudos was born January 31st, 1939 in Webster, South Dakota, in a town of only 1,700 residents as of 2024. Is anybody there? I feel like I have one of you guys isn't there. I feel like this place doesn't exist. Also, if you hear thunder in the background of these videos, there's a horrible storm outside here in Texas. I think it just adds to the ambiance, all right? If you hear that, that's what it is. It's not a serial killer or anything. Tell me if that door opens. So Jerry Brudos, like myself, was an unplanned pregnancy to his parents, Henry and Eileen Brudos. And when the parents did find out that they were pregnant, they had hoped for a daughter. However, they would receive a second son. So from an early age, Jerry experienced and mistreatment from his mother, who wanted a daughter specifically. Henry, his dad, didn't really care that much, but his mom, Eileen, just really wanted a daughter. This is the nature versus nurture shit. She beat the shit out of Jerry for not being a girl. And you'll see how this clearly carried on to who he picked as victims and his fetishes and whatnot, but we'll get to that. So she would hit him and belittle him, wishing for a daughter. On the contrast, his older brother Larry was extremely loved by his mother. Classic older child and youngest child moment. Because in her view, he was a planned son. They wanted a son and then a daughter. Newsflash, you can't choose, okay? We're not there yet. Or maybe we are there yet, with like IVF and all this stuff. This was the 30s, okay? So, and his father, Henry, did have a short temper, but he wasn't known to hit his kids like Eileen did. Most of the abuse would come from her because she was extremely matriarchal and was viewed as a moralist and a blue nose. But the Brudos family lived a quiet and pretty humble life. His mother, Eileen, was a homemaker looking after other people's houses, cleaning them and doing housework for the other families. And his father was a seasonal employee. So with the both of them working, their family could live pretty comfortably. But because of the hostile environment that Jerry grew up in, he lacked paternalism in his life from both parents. And this would lead to him to develop a relationship with a woman that lived in his neighborhood that was close to his own mother's age. Oh, ding ding, here we go. First ingredient in the piece of shit serial killer stew, okay? He's got major mommy issues. I feel like a lot of these serial killers have mommy issues. And then that mommy issue turns into who they kill, but we'll get into that. So Jerry's dating like a 40-some-odd woman at this point, maybe almost in her 50s, and he's barely a teenager at this point, so that's just illegal. So it's pretty terrible. Like I don't have sympathy for him really because of who he became, but you know, when you're growing up in that situation, it's not fair. Didn't help, basically. But this woman was very caring and loving towards Jerry, as she most likely had a sense of what Jerry's home life was like since she lived in the neighborhood, and she talked to him on a daily basis. But she was reportedly so infatuated with Jerry that she would often fantasize about him being her own child. There's a whole lot of up there that I'm not gonna get into, but you can see it. If it was the opposite, a man and a girl, we get it. Okay. Anyway, so he was a victim at this point as a child, unknowingly. But eventually Jerry would stop seeing this woman in his neighborhood because she was diabetic, and her health began to decline very fast, making it harder for her to care for Jerry. Jerry would also have a young girl as a friend that he would play with regularly. However, she would pass away from tuberculosis, leaving Jerry with no one to care for him and no one to build an actual connection with. So Jerry was now alone in the world with a family that never loved him in the first place and that would just constantly abuse him, which is terrible. That's terrible, okay? Like, you're gonna have maybe a little sympathy for him right now, and then we'll get into the part where you're like, well, this piece of shit. But that's terrible. I can acknowledge that. And as Jerry grew older, he would go to school and his life would really not get much better. He wasn't a bad student necessarily, but he was just compared to his older brother. And Larry was just an excellent student across the board, oftentimes making Jerry's efforts look pretty meaningless. I just realized it's Jerry and Larry. That's hilarious. That's really funny. That's something I would do as a parent. Anyway, this also reminds me of me and my older sister Jessica, who's literally good at everything. Like, just everything she touches turns to perfection, and then I would just come along and try my hardest and just could never get as close to her. So I get it, Jerry, I get it. But I didn't grow up to be a serial killer, so you're still the piece of shit, all right? But Jerry would struggle to make friends, and he would never really talk to the teachers either. And he also never really took part in any extracurricular activities, except for being the secretary-treasurer for a youth club. That sounds like a made-up job, but a really fun job. Somehow, I don't know. And during this time, Jerry would often complain about having pain in his throat and severe migraines. I feel you. And that would also contribute to his reclusive nature. Another reason why Jerry struggled to make friends was because of his dad's work. It constantly had them moving around in the Pacific Northwest in his early childhood. It wouldn't be later in Jerry's childhood that they would actually settle down in Salem, Oregon as a permanent place of residence. And it was around this time that Jerry would develop a major foot fetish. If you know what I'm saying. Try not to get demonetized here. Around the age of just 5 years old. That's wild. That's wild. But he would realize this when he saw a family friend's teen's daughter asleep on his bed. He tried to sneak into the room and steal her high-heeled shoes off her feet, but was caught and shooed out of the room. Shooed out of the room. Get it? I like that. That's good. We can't have a lot of fun talking about serial killers, but we can make puns, okay? And another experience occurred when he was 5 as well. Jerry had found a pair of leather bedazzled high heels at a local junkyard and took them home. Who doesn't? You know, if I saw that, slay, take. And when he got home, he would wear them in front of his mother. Can you guys hear that? And when she saw them in the shoes, she would call him wicked, and not in a good way, and demanded that he would take them back to the junkyard. But Jerry wouldn't take them back, and he would just wear them in secret. And when his mother would find out that he didn't take the shoes back and would catch him wearing them again, she would beat him and then burn the shoes. Just let the kid wear high heel shoes, okay? Who didn't? My little brother wore our high heel shoes all the time. We didn't blink an eye, and he's also not a murderer. He's actually a cop, so good on you, Jake. Good job, bud. So 2 years after the junkyard incident, Jerry reported that he tried to steal high-heeled shoes from his first grade teacher. And when he confessed his actions, and he loves confessing, we'll get into that too, he was questioned on why he did it, and all he had to say for himself was he wasn't sure. And Jerry's fetishisms would only increase as he got older. It would develop from stealing to fondling to smelling women's lingerie and underwear. He would be introduced to this fetish from a neighborhood friend who had several older sisters. Gross, dude. So when he would go to his friend's house, he would steal/smell his friend's sister's underwear, and Jerry would continue this practice well into his teenage years. And he even admitted later on in life that he would actually wear the underwear himself as well. And Jerry's isolation and rejection from most of his peers his age really played a role in him developing into the sickened individual that he became. We're talking about the nurture part of the nature-nurture here. Not to mention his absolutely horrendous relationship with his parents. Jerry seemed to lack all stability and companionship in his life. And these two things are trivial for brain and social development from an early age. And without these things, we could start to see the effects that take place as Jerry enters into puberty. Okay, just toss more ingredients into the piece of shit stew. And because of Jerry's reclusive nature, he never really got any chicks. Can you believe it? So his knowledge of was extremely limited, and this would cause him to pleasure himself a lot, and this would get him in a lot of trouble with his mother. He would claim that he started to pleasure in 1953 and would frequently have wet dreams, and whenever his mom would find stains on his bed, she would beat him and force him to clean it. So the lack of attention from the women in his personal life and the women his own age left Jerry inexperienced, lustfully craving to fulfill his dirty fetishism. shiz. And this lust would lead to his first offenses. And as I said before, as Jerry became a teenager, his lustful actions began to become more and more extreme, as he would start to stalk local women, secretly taking photos of the women he stalked and stealing their underwear and lingerie as well. And this is around the time also where Brutus would begin fantasizing about entrapping and holding women captive, you know, as you do as a teenager. He also dug a tunnel that led to a small room underneath his family house, Andy Dufresne style, shout out to Shawshank Redemption, and would just spend hours down in his hole fantasizing about capturing women and bringing them down there. We're stepping into serial killer territory right now. We're stepping over, we're on the edge right now. We're about to fall off. All right, stay with me. And Jerry would eventually try to fulfill these fantasies by luring a girl from his neighborhood into his bedroom. But he would then leave the room and then come back wearing a mask while brandishing a kniff. He would force her to strip while he took pictures, but then he would let her go. He then would disappear again, only to return wearing his original outfit he was in when he first brought her into the room, as Jerry Brudos. And he would have his hair all messed up and bruises on him as well when he reappeared into the bedroom, and he would claim that an intruder locked him away in the barn at Kniff Point, and he was the one to make her strip and take photos of her. So he was pretending like he was two different people to have his own alibi. And it would honestly work. And it wouldn't be the last time that he did it. I don't know why I find that so funny to think about. Just like, hey, here's my room. It's pretty nice, right? Okay, you sit down there. I'll be right back. I'm gonna get us some lemonade. All right? Okay. Hey, it's definitely not me, Jerry Brudos. I am a stranger and I just really like to take some pictures. Please take off your garments and say cheese, all right? I put Jerry in the barn. I know we don't have a barn, but he's in there anyway. Maybe just tilt your head a little bit. That's nice. There we go. Perfect. I'll be right back. Wow, are you all right? That was crazy. That guy was nuts. Oh, I took these from him. You look great, by the way. This is fantastic. And this wouldn't be the first time Jerry would fulfill this fantasy and get away with it. From that point on, starting at the age of 16, this guy's doing this bit, man. And I have to admit, it's creative. I feel really bad for the victims. Obviously, it's horrendous. And naturally, I hope he's rotting in hell as always. But it's pretty creative. He would continue to kidnap girls and lure them into his family corn crib, leaving only to return with a mask or having his hair combed differently while holding a knife. He literally just sometimes came in the room with his hair parted a little differently. That'd be like me coming in just with my bangs like this. And be like, it's not me, man, I'm a new person. And he would also claim that he was Jerry's brother Ed and take pictures of his victims. And then he would also go on to evolve and start fondling his victims as well, which is terrible. Hey, Jerry Brutus is a piece of shit. Okay, let's continue. But it is said, based on information given to authorities, that he never SA'd any of his victims necessarily at this point, which I don't really agree with, because if you're fondling someone, I don't care if it's against their will and they didn't consent to it, that is SA. So, but this is, you know, back in the 50s at this point, so it just wasn't the same. But those victims, they got SA'd, and it's terrible. And it wouldn't be until April 1956 that Brutus would eventually face legal consequences for his repeated actions. It is unconfirmed, but this is suspected to be one of Jerry Brutus's first mugshots. He just looks like a creep, dude. Jerry had asked a girl to go on a date with him, but he would take her down an empty road and then demand her to undress. When the girl would naturally refuse, Brutus would drag her out of the car and start to beat her. And in the process, he would break her nose. But the girl's loud screams would get the attention of a couple that was driving by, and the couple would get out of their car and ask what the f is going on. Brutus would claim and try to cover up and say that she had fallen out of the car, and would say that he was trying to save the girl from a crazy attacker that was trying to attack her. What? But the couple, not being complete idiots, wouldn't believe his story, and they would take Brutus and the girl to the nearest police station, where he would confess, loves to confess, the only good thing about Brutus, he would confess to attacking the girl, but he would also say that he never intended to hurt the girl, and only wanted her to undress so he could take photographs, which at this point pretty much adds up to his last offenses. That's all he was doing at this point. He wasn't hurting them physically yet. But while in custody, he would deny any allegations of him doing this in the past. However, he was eventually charged charged with assault and battery. And this was followed up with a search of his bedroom where numerous Polaroids of naked teenage girls were found. One of the girls was identifiable, and when the police went to go ask the girl if Jerry had done this, she would say that his brother Ed Brudos had done it. She was one of the girls that fell for his bit, and not Jerry. So the police, knowing that he didn't have a brother named Ed, he would have all this evidence against him, and he would be sent to the Polk County Juvenile Detention Center. While detained, Jerry would have a psychological evaluation at the Oregon State Hospital, and he would be there for 9 months, only allowed to attend high school. And the conclusion of his evaluation was that he was a very depressed individual who showed signs of schizotypal personality disorder, which made it very difficult for him to form regular relationships with people. The doctors would also conclude that his sexual fantasies were derived for his hatred of women, which came from his abusive mother, which makes sense. It's not good, but it kind of makes sense. After being released from the hospital, Jerry, like many other serial killers and cult leaders at this time, would join the army. He would continue to fantasize during this time, but eventually be discharged in the fall of 1959. And he would move back to his parents' house where he would sleep in the second bedroom, but when Larry came back from college, he would have to sleep in the shed. This guy was really he's just getting hit from every angle, man. I still don't really have sympathy for him at this point. He's being creep and he knows it. And while he was living with his parents, he would get a job as an electrical engineer at a local radio station. And this is when Jerry would start to stalk women again. In one instance, he would follow a woman back to her apartment, strangled her, but he didn't kill her. But he stole her shoes. Brutus would again try to stalk a woman and attack her. However, she would repel him like a badass, but he was only able to steal one shoe before fleeing. In both instances, he only wanted the women's shoes, and no charges were ever brought against him. So at this point, this guy's just like a creepy shoe guy. He just really likes to take women's shoes and wear them and sniff them and stuff, which isn't innocent in any way. I think that's still terrifying if a guy ran up to me on the street and tried to steal my Vessi shoes, which I still love, by the way, not sponsored. I'd just be pissed because they're good shoes. But he's not necessarily dangerous at this point. But this would be the last major offense that Jerry would commit before his killing streak began. Eventually, he would actually get married, believe it or not, to a woman named Ralphine Schwindler and get married on September 30th, 1961 and have one child. And the newlyweds would move around Oregon until landing in Salem, where Jerry would work on cars in his garage along with his day job to pay his family's lifestyle. And it is believed that his wife's willingness to fulfill Jerry's sexual fantasies is what kept him at bay and stopped his urges to stalk women and steal their shoes at the time. However, this would not last very long, as we know, otherwise we wouldn't be here. As he aged, he gained weight and his wife found him less attractive. Combining that with his child growing older and needing more attention, him and his wife's life became less and less frequent. And this would lead Jerry to go back to his old habits. While his wife was giving birth to their second child in 1967, he would follow a young woman to her apartment and strangle her, grape her, and would steal her shoes. He wouldn't kill her, but this would be the first time that Jerry would actually grape one of his victims, demonstrating that his fantasies continued to grow darker even while they were being fulfilled in his marriage. He would eventually be arrested though, because he was caught inside a women's dorm at Oregon State University while wearing short jeans, high heels, and women's underwear. He was charged with stealing the women's clothes. In today's day and age, that probably nobody would have noticed. Probably nobody would have noticed, but back then that would have just been like the sorest thumb sticking out, you know? He's just asking to get caught at this point, which maybe he did a little bit. He did confess a lot, and we'll see that, but just the juxtaposition as today's time and back then is just crazy. So from the very beginning of Jerry Brudos' life, he very much lacked love and lacked companionship from any woman in his life, as we know. And with lots of time on his hands and literally no sexual experience during his developmental years, Jerry would create extreme fantasies in his brain that eventually would come out. His actions of stalking, choking, beating women, and eventually graping them would all be cause of his neglect from his formational years. His urges would be curbed when he got married, but time naturally causes everyone to change, and in this case, Jerry, a lot, and his wife would slowly stop indulging him, probably because his fantasies became more and more dark and she wasn't willing to do those, which, fair enough. Just because you're married to somebody doesn't mean you have to indulge in all of their fantasies, especially if they're f***ed up. But this would lead to his fantasies taking over again, except they would now be extremely dangerous, which would lead into his first murder. Linda Catherine Slauson was Jerry Brutus's first victim. She was a 19-year-old door-to-door encyclopedia saleswoman from Aloha, Oregon. And on January 26, 1968, Slauson was going door-to-door selling her encyclopedias when she would make a fateful mistake, mistaking one of the addresses of a neighbor who scheduled an appointment with her for a potential sale for Brutus's address instead. Upon learning what Slauson was there for, Brutus would take advantage of that and pretend to be enamored and interested in purchasing encyclopedias. Doing so, he would lure her into his home and would sit Slauson down on a stool in his basement, where she would begin her sales pitch as she always did. However, Brutus would quickly take action and he would bludgeon her in the head with a piece of wood before strangling her to death. And to hide her from anyone else in the house seeing her, he would tuck her body away underneath the staircase because he wasn't home alone. His mother would be in the home with him along with his daughter, and he would ask his mother to take his daughter to the store to purchase hamburgers for him to get them out of the house. And after they left, he would return to the body in the basement under the staircase and he would engage in with the corpse. I just want to say that this makes me physically ill and sick, and I hope he's burning in hell and that Satan is doing the same thing as he did to his victims. Okay, all right, let's get back to it. While undressing Slauson, he would find that she was wearing attractive red undergarments, and because of this, it would later inspire Brutus to take a box of women's underwear and footwear he had accumulated and saved, usually from stealing, and he would dress and undress the bodies in different shoes and lingerie after they were already deceased. And while engaging in with her, he would also be photographing the crimes as they took place as well. And hours after spending time with the body, he would sever Slauson's left foot from her body. And he would do this by using a hacksaw. And then after the foot was off, he would store it in the back of his freezer in the basement. This was to keep it for later, and this would be used in the future for modeling, going through his extensive collection, and also to, you know, pleasure himself too, because he's a sick. But to hide the rest of the evidence, since he had only kept the foot, he would tie her corpse to a heavy cylinder head from a car, and he would drop her body over a rail somewhere in Marion County, according to Brutus, obviously after he got caught, stating he couldn't give an accurate location. So after this first murder, he would have a pretty substantial cool-down period and wouldn't commit another murder until November 26th, 1968 of the same year. Because Brutus would be known as a murderer that acted on crimes of opportunity. He wasn't a process killer like Ted Bundy, where he would plan ahead of time and know who his victim was gonna be. He would just let these victims basically walk into his life and then take advantage of it. And this was unfortunately the case of Jan Susan Whitney. She was a 23-year-old motorist he would encounter driving home from his job in Lebanon, Oregon. While driving somewhere between Salem and Albany, Brutus would stumble upon 3 individuals standing beside a broken down Rambler. After pulling alongside them and taking a look, he stated that he could fix Whitney's car, but he needed to go back to his house to grab the necessary tools to fix it. Whitney and the other strangers, who were just hitchhikers that she had picked up, agreed to come along with him because this is the 50s and nobody has any red flag filters, man. Nobody's got them. But the only catch was that he would have to drop off the 2 hitchhikers on his way to the house to their intended destinations. And agreeing to that, they would all hop into his car. After dropping them off, Brutus and Whitney would head to his house. Well, he would promptly get out of his car, go into his house, grab the necessary tools that he needed, while Whitney sat in his car and waited. And after returning to the car, Brutus asked Whitney to do a little challenge for him, a little serial killer riz, if you will. He asked her to close her eyes and pretend to tie a shoelace. What? Bitch, I would close my eyes and start firing out punches at this point, okay? But he would ask her to do this without her hands. So essentially, he would just ask her to close her eyes and do nothing, but just think about doing something, which I guess is, again, creative in a way. Where does this guy come up with this shit? All right, is he reading books? Is this in a book somewhere? What the f? But while she was doing the challenge, Brutus came up behind her and strangled her from behind using a leather luggage strap. And then he would move on to graping her in his vehicle. He then took her inside the garage workshop where he would dress her up in different lingeries and shoes, playing a sick dress-up game like she was a doll, and afterwards he would also commit necrophilia repeatedly on the corpse as well. And her body would be left on a pulley system for 2 days after the incident. And Brudos would admit to using her corpse whenever he needed during those 2 days. She would be dressed up in a multitude of different lingerie items and photographed. Brudos would also admit to cutting one of her breasts off and using it as a paperweight. This idea was thrown out though after noting that the epoxy hardener failed to fully set, so instead he would stuff it full of sawdust and pin it to a wooden board. He was just a sick. I've read about a lot of these guys and went whatever, and it's just some of the things these people think of are just like, get a hobby, you know? And not this. Build miniature ships and bottles. But, you know, put that creativity into something else other than hurting people. But according to Brudos' confession, there was actually a car that would crash into Brudos' garage 2 days after Whitney's murder, and it would leave a giant hole in the garage. And when a policeman would arrive on the scene, he took a peek into the darkness and wouldn't notice anything. You didn't notice anything? You didn't notice just that mound that was nailed onto a board, or, you know, a body on a pulley system? But he said he didn't notice anything due to the dust and the debris that was flying around. Oh. Dude, I'm reading about all this creepy shit. I thought that was Jerry Brudos behind me. It's bear. God, you. God damn, that my heart actually jumped out of my asshole right now. God damn it. Where was I? Oh yeah, incompetent police officers. My favorite. Because the hole would be at ground level, so he just looked in, and obviously the body was hanging from the ceiling. I guess you don't just walk into a building assuming that you're gonna see a body hanging from the ceiling, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but still. But because of this incident, Brudos would quickly dispose of the corpse by tying it to railroad iron and throwing it into the Willamette River, alongside Slauson's foot, which was the first victim, which had begun to decompose. And Whitney's body would eventually be found by police submerged in the river close to Independence, Oregon, a month after Brudos' conviction. And this would be found about a mile downstream from the location that he would tell investigators, and the body had been identified via dental records. And here is actually a photo that he took of himself while hanging one of his victims from the ceiling. So creepy, dude. I see this in my nightmares. I'm sorry if I gave it to you. So for his next victim, the cooldown period would be slightly shorter, which is pretty common in the serial killer world. And the next victim would be 18-year-old Karen Elena Sprinkler, an Oregon State University chemistry student. So on March 27th, 1969, Brudos, who was dressed in women's clothing at the time, classic Brudos, had impulsively drove his car into a parking lot after observing a woman wearing high heels and a miniskirt. Can't wear high heels around this guy, all right? That's why I never wear high heels. After reading this story, I'm never gonna wear them again. Okay. After parking his car, he would attempt to chase the individual before she got away. So he would head back to his car defeated, but another woman would exit her car and walk towards him at the Mirror and Frank department store. This woman would unfortunately be Sprinkler, who was going to meet with her mother later for lunch. But he would approach her at gunpoint, telling her that she had to enter his vehicle, and Brudos would promise not to harm her. This guy doesn't hold up his promises. According to Brudos' statements in the future, she would continuously plead for him not to hurt her, stating that she would do anything he wanted as long as he didn't kill her, which is just so sad. I mean, none of us know what we're gonna do at that point. It's just like, you want to get out of that situation. I feel like that's such a human response to do. So he would then force her to have sex with him on his workshop floor, making her pose and wear different shoes and underwear as he took pictures of her. But after this, he tied up her hands behind her back and a rope around her neck, and he would ask her if it was too tight. She would reply that it was indeed too tight, but he would quickly throw the rope over the ceiling beam and pull it down, causing her to be tied from her neck above ground. Brudos then would state that she kicked a little and then died. And over the next few hours, as he always does, he would commit more horrible acts on the body, such as severing her body parts off and creating plastic molds of them, and then eventually tying her body to a 6-cylinder engine component and throwing her into the Willamette River along with the other bodies. This is what looks like a normal photo, but is actually a photo of Sprinkler very shortly before she died that Brudos took of her in his garage. So after Sprinkler, this is when Jerry Brudos would have his 2 failed attempted abductions. On April 21st and April 22nd of 1969, Brudos attempted to abduct 2 women. The first was 24-year-old motorist Sharon Wood, who encountered him in a basement stairwell in a parking garage. That is literally my worst nightmare and every woman's worst nightmare. I also avoid those at all costs. I suggest you do the same. Wood would state that she felt a tap on her shoulder, and turning around, she was met with a pistol directed straight at her face. And Brudos would order her not to scream. And while attempting to restrain the young woman, she fought tooth and nail, badass bitch style, biting, kicking, punching, twisting, all while directing the pistol away from her, and she would bite the shit out of him deeply into his hand like a badass, and Brudos would throw her onto the concrete floor before fleeing like a little bitch that he is, and would leave her to run away and go to the cops. Just take note, ladies and gentlemen, that's what you do. You fight for your life, because you only got one, and you never go to a second location, okay? That is the worst thing you could do. And the second victim was a 15-year-old named Gloria Jean Smith, who was also forced at gunpoint. She was asked to accompany Brudos to his green Volkswagen Carman Ghia. He told the girl that he wanted her to come with him and that he wouldn't grape or hurt her. Sounds like you'll do both, since you mentioned him, Brudos. Brudos would then grab the rear of her coat, forcing her to accompany him. She started to let go of his coat, to which he agreed, and when she would see another woman working in her front yard, she yelled and ran towards this woman, which made Brudo run like a little bitch from the scene, okay? Just scream, bite, yell, punch, hit, all the above, okay? All the above. This is just a little lesson today, okay? I just want all my little babies to be safe, okay? You gotta be safe out there, all right? Okay. And now on to his last victim, which would be Linda Dawn Saley, a 22-year-old secretary and part-time student at Portland State University. In the afternoon of April 23rd, 1969, so a very short period after his last murder and attempts, Saley had finished her shopping for her fiancé and bought him a pair of jeans. And as she was heading back to her car, Brudos would approach her and imitate being an officer, even having a fake badge, Ted Bundy style. But Ted Bundy wasn't around yet, all right? So Brudos did it first. He would accuse her of shoplifting and that she had to be detained. Stating her innocence, she would agree to accompany Brudos despite the accusations, which then she was promptly being told that she was being kidnapped for ransom. I can't even imagine what was going through her mind at this point. You know, like, I don't even know what I'd do at that point. So after driving her back to his house, he would park the car in the garage and order Saley to follow him across the yard and into his house. What Brudos hadn't planned on was his wife and children being at the house at this time. His wife would go onto the porch and call Brudos in for dinner. Brudos, being only 10 feet away but not being seen by his wife yet, ordered Saley to stay still where she was. And Brudos would tell his wife that he would be in a few minutes. This is where Saley should have screamed, but I get she was probably so scared, and it's just makes me so mad. But anyway, he then brought Saley back to his garage where he would tie her up by a cord. And then he would proceed to go inside and have dinner with his family while this woman was tied up in his garage. And after finishing dinner with his family, he would go back to the garage and see that Saley had actually got free from her restraints, but she hadn't made any efforts to escape any further. And that's just thought maybe due to shock. I don't know, but it's just heartbreaking. And she would try to resist his efforts of placing a leather strap around her neck to pull her off her feet, and she would beg and ask him, "Why are you doing this to me?" She would then begin to scratch and claw at Brudos as he lifted her off the ground by a strap, but she would soon fall unconscious, where Brudos would continue to strangle her to death and grape her. She would be hung by the neck afterwards on the same workshop pulley as the previous victims, also placing hypodermic needles into her rib cage below her armpits. He would then run an electric current in an effort to reanimate her body. These experiments would be a failure though. No shit, as it just singed her skin, but he was hoping it would produce seizure or dancing-like symptoms. Afterwards, he would keep her body for 24 hours, engaging in before tying her corpse to a vehicle gearbox and throwing her corpse as well into the Willamette River. Brudos, usually mutilating the breasts in some way or another, wouldn't do this to Sally though, stating that he believed that her Nepal area was too pink. I have no words, dude. Anyway, Brudos was obviously an extremely disturbed and f***ed up individual, and thankfully, karma is a bitch and would eventually catch up to him. So on May 29th, 1969, investigators had amassed significant evidence relating to the attempted abduction of Gloria Smith to arrest Brudos. For this offense, as inquiries into the murders continued, Brudos would later be found underneath a blanket in his family's station wagon by Highway State patrolmen. Like a little bitch, just hiding under a blanket so the monsters don't get him. Newsflash, you're the monster. While in custody, Jerry Brudos would use his one phone call to phone his wife and tell her to destroy any incriminating evidence that remained in the house. But his wife would reject his request, knowing what kind of monster her husband already was. And Brudos, loving to confess, would confess to the 4 murders while in custody, though it did take some provocation from the investigators. When he was first apprehended, he was heavily questioned on the discoveries made by the property search, specifically the evidence that was found in the garage in connection to 3 of the missing women, Sprinkler, Sally, and Whitney. And eventually he would cave in and tell the officers about his dark fetishes and confess to the murders. In the days he was being questioned, though, he would deny the evidence, claiming that it was all circumstantial and that he actually had nothing to do with the disappearances of the 3 women, but would eventually confess to them, obviously. And Linda Slauson was a Jane Doe murder and not connected to Brudos in any way at this point. However, he would confess to it and say that it was just opportunistic. But Jerry would never be charged or put on trial for the murder of Linda Slauson, despite him literally saying that he murdered her. The reason being that even though he had multiple photos of her lower body, legs, ankles, feet, he never took any photos proving whether or not she was alive or dead in the photos, making it not possible to charge him with her murder, which is just bonkers to me. Obviously these other women were killed the exact same way, had photos of them, did everything the same, and they just what? Anyway, I feel so bad for Linda's family because it is so obviously, we know it's Jerry. Okay, but still, not having that closure is just f***ed up. And while in custody, he would be evaluated by a psychologist. And during this evaluation, Brudos would continue to stay reserved when asked about the premeditation of the murders, saying, "There must be something wrong with me." Yeah, no shit, Brudos. And when he was asked if he had any hatred for women, he would just outright deny it. However, later on, he would claim that the act of killing allowed him to let off some steam. There's a lot of other ways you could do that. By the way, the psychologist concluded that regular sex did not stimulate Jerry's fantasies enough, and this would create a lust that would eventually take over him and cause him to kill. Thanks, psychologist. I figured that out myself. Furthermore, it was also concluded that Brudos preemptively knew that he was going to murder the women he killed, even when some of them are viewed as opportunistic encounters. And Brudos at this time had conclusively linked himself to all 4 murders. He had described the kidnapping of Whitney, linked himself to what was thought to be a Jane Doe case, but now we know it was Slauson, and photos had been found of the 2 victims found in Long Tom River. And Jerry Brudos would have his court date set for June 4th, 1969, beginning at 9 a.m. So Brudos would be charged with the murders of Whitney, Sprinkler, and Sally, and would try to plead insanity. However, he would be subsequently examined by numerous doctors and found fit to stand trial. Yeah. And his new court date would be June 30th, 1969. Jerry would end up pleading guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder before a judge 3 days before his trial. And he would be sentenced to 3 life sentences with the possibility of parole. What? And would serve his sentence in Oregon State Penitentiary. And shortly after Jerry's trial, his wife, Ralphine, who we haven't talked about much, would be charged with first-degree murder based on an eyewitness report claiming to have seen her helping Jerry cover a young woman with a blanket. However, this witness would come forward and deny their claim, and all charges against Ralphine Brudos would be dropped. So we don't really actually know if Ralphine was ever involved in these murders. I feel like it'd be hard to not know something's going on in the garage, or, you know, see bodies hanging up in there like a up air freshener, but who am I to judge, right? So while in custody, the Brudos children would be put into state care. The oldest child, Teresa Brudos, would be questioned about her mother's involvement in the murders, and after Ralphine was acquitted of all her charges, she changed her and her kids' identities, divorced Jerry, and moved to an undisclosed location. But Jerry would maintain his love for his ex-wife until his inevitable and awesome death. While in prison, Brudos would be numerous times. Aww. Poor baby Brudos. By other prisoners because he was labeled a offender. However, he did refuse to name anyone that beat him because snitches get stitches. He gets stitches anyway because he's a sex offender. And despite his label, he would be a good prisoner, helping to install cable TV in the prison and maintain the prisoners' electronic records. And while incarcerated, Jerry was still allowed to have catalogs of women in high heels, which would continue to fuel his sick fantasies. This was a different time, I understand. But like, what? And Jerry would also have a multitude of interviews while in prison, one of those being between his former Marion County detective, Jim Burns. In the interview, Jerry would be asked if he felt sorry for his victims. Jerry would then proceed to crumple up a piece of paper and say that he cared as much for those girls as he did the paper. Shortly after this interview, Jerry would be diagnosed with psychopathic behaviors. No shit. And Jerry would remain in prison, thankfully, for the rest of his life, despite multiple appeals for parole. He would be told in 1995, after serving 26 years, that he could no longer ask for parole, and that he would spend the rest of his stupid life in prison. And Jerry Brudos would eventually die in prison on March 28th, 2006, in the early morning. He had been fighting liver cancer while incarcerated. Heard that's real painful. Sorry, bud. Not sorry. He had served 37 years of his life sentences, making him the longest incarcerated inmate in Oregon history. And he would be 67 at the time of his death. And everybody that was connected to the case would celebrate his death along with the entire state of Oregon. Yeah. And since his arrest, there have been numerous books written about him, along with appearances in TV shows, such as Netflix's original show, Mindhunter, which please bring it back. Please bring that show back. It's so good. It's literally the best show I've ever watched, and that's actually how I found out about Jerry Brudos. In season 1, episode 7 and 8, there was also an hour-long documentary aired in 2008 called Jerome Brudos, The Lust Killer. Numerous crime and TV shows. There was a portrayal of Brudos in The World's Most Evil Killers, The Shoe Footish Killer. There is also a website called supernaut.com, which currently sells a lot of personal items, including his socks and an image of his deceased mother in a casket and photos of him in prison and when he was a child. It's just a really f***ed up website. I wouldn't really look at it, but it's just another weird thing involved with Jerry Brudos. In conclusion, Jerry Brudos was a disgusting and f***ed up, sickened individual, and I am extremely happy that he is now rotting in hell, hoping that if there is Satan down there, he is doing what he did to those women, to him. These cases are always extremely interesting to me. I hope you enjoyed hearing about it and learning about it today. I also tell these just be safe out there, you know? Look for red flags everywhere, all the time, and also don't wear high heels. I guess. I don't really know what else to take away from this, but I am always open to hearing other cases that you guys want me to go over. Cults, conspiracies, murders, serial killers, all the above. Let me know down in the comments below, and I will see your beautiful face in the next video, okay?